Jon Vest is the Extension Agent for Floyd County with the Virginia Cooperative Extension. His expertise helps novice and experienced farmers produce quality livestock and crops throughout our region. Jon has offered to share his experiences with our audience and provide them with the knowledge to keep agriculture strong. This is the Ag Show with Jon Vest.
We'd like to welcome our outside guests that will be tuning in for this episode of the Ag Show, brought to you by Citizens Telephone Cooperative and Virginia Cooperative Extension. I'm Jon Vest, and this will be our segment on soils.
This episode of the Ag Show and the Seed to Shelf series is brought to you by We Insure Retirement. If you are retired or are planning to retire, visit WeInsureRetirement.com to keep the gold in your golden years.
We'll go ahead and jump right into this evening, being that thank you for those of you that braved the rain and the water, and certainly that was coming down out there. It makes my job a little easier tonight because one of the components of soil that I oftentimes talk about, or the important component of soil, is its water holding capability and it's the water quantity within the soil, and all those things play a vital role in many of the things that we'll talk about tonight. The nice thing about soils is, the fact of the matter is, in our area, there's very limited things that we can't grow. Most of that is in Southwest Virginia, even at our elevation. Most of our limiting factors is not in our soils that we have around us or below us, but rather in the weather and the climate situation that we have as it blows in on these storms like what we experienced today. Fortunately, it's nice to be able to come inside and have a soils discussion. I would much rather walk everybody out into a garden and literally have each one of us reach down and scoop soil and grab things in your hands. And actually, I'm not precluding that from actually happening this evening. You're going to actually help me in a demonstration right off the bat with regards to helping us remember everything that we've forgotten as kids. Because I promise the majority of this information, or the content of this information, was taught to us in elementary school. It was taught to us again in high school, and it was taught to me again in college in soils class over the course of an entire semester. And yet we still watch and we still participate as the soil destroyers out there, with actually sometimes setting our soils back as opposed to doing those things that will improve them and give our plants and our gardens and our turf, whatever it may be, the best opportunity to do well. And so if I had to ask any of our participants in the room, and I shouldn't do pre-quizzes or post-tests and things like that, but do any of you remember the three main components of soil that make up just general topsoil? For instance, right here is a container of good old-fashioned Floyd County topsoil that has been allowed to dry indoors for several weeks. But do you remember what the actual materials are, the three main components of soil as we were taught as children? Microbes will be included in the organic matter, and certainly a very important component. And we're going to talk about when we add certain organic matter and material to the soil, how our microbes operate in their window of usefulness. And sometimes some of the, or even the organic matter that we think we're doing so wonderfully by adding, is actually a detriment for a period of time, even to those microbes. So that's why I'm going to bring up, I guess what I'm trying to get across to everyone tonight is that we don't want to take huge swings at our soil. We want to recognize what we have in our lawn and landscape. We want to be able to understand what our baseline as far as nutrients and things are that may be available to us. And then we want to adjust through our use of organics or amendments and other materials to get that soil up into the optimum level for whatever crop we're actually growing. So, like I said, I want to start tonight with a little demonstration. This is actual Floyd County soil. You could actually tell once we start into the exercise and open things back up, you'll see that it has lots of mica in it. And many of us are faced, whether we're in Copper Hill or Willis or areas around the county, we're faced with a lot of mica in our soil, or oftentimes the fool's gold. All the kids just love it when I demonstrate with our soil. They say, oh, we got gold in the soil. No, it's just our fool's gold. But what I have here is a sifting sieve section of containers that are going to allow us to separate soil. And once again, it's really to kind of show or prove a point before we ever get started tonight. And once that point is proven, hopefully we'll put away some of the unnecessary techniques that we're using and think about concentrating on building healthy soil. So if I had to ask, sir, if you would not mind, if you would put four to five nice scoops into our container here. There we go. I think that will work. I think that will work just fine. All right. Now I actually passed out a bookmark. Each one of you have a bookmark. It's kind of interesting right there. It asks right on top, have you eaten any soil lately? Yeah. I must admit, this is not my material. This is actually some materials that I had the wonderful opportunity to host Cynthia Hancock with our Skyline Soil and Water District. She's been working with me in the past couple days here in our school system in Floyd County. We visited every elementary school, and we had the opportunity to take the kids to this actual exercise right here. But in order to really demonstrate what soil, the three components of soil, in this real case Floyd situation, we're going to pass this around. Every one of you is a part of the experiment, but give it 6 good shakes holding top and bottom. Don't get crazy like the kids and start doing this, because you'll separate things and then we'll have a big mess to clean up. But top and bottom, several good shakes. Pass it to the person beside you. Pass it right on back. Now it's interesting, if I have any youth watching on television this evening, yes, you're watching the importance of why we talk about experimentation, always being treated very similar in procedure. These grown-ups are doing the exact same thing that we participated in our 3rd grade classroom this morning. All right, Josh, if you'll pass that back up to me right here. How many people like to jump out and plow their garden and then have everything tilled up by this time of the year? Nothing like seeing a nice raised tilled bed of garden soil and stuff there. Let's have a little conversation about what we're creating for ourselves, sequentially down the road. Now, if I had to ask you the 3 parts of the soil, none of us jumped out immediately with explanation.
Sand, clay, and organic matter.
2 of the 3 of the main components. Organic matter was the 4th I would add in there. But he's exactly right. I should have sand, I should have silt, and I should have clay. And it's important because it's important to me that all soil be comprised of all of these, because that's what creates good garden soil. But anything that we're doing to contribute to the breakdown or the compaction or the ready destruction of our soil by breaking it down beyond what its normal texture and material should be, results in adverse plant growth in some situations. And that's what we're going to talk about once this procedure is all done. But looking right here, what we have left in our first container is the rock and the material that we have left at the very top. As we know, all soil is basically rock and crunched down, and that material broken down over time, whether it be erosion and other things helping contribute to that. But on that upper layer, that's certainly what we got, along with the quartz and the other things that we have, and that mica fool's gold that we have here in Floyd County. Can we tilt that for the camera there? Oh, let's move right on out here. This is the rock material, and with the example of actually fool's gold, we actually have that organic material. You mentioned there's root system and actual grass material in our container here, and that is a component of soil. But when we start talking about topsoil, our first interesting component is usually that of sand. And as you can see here, we'll pass this down the table and pass it back and make its way around. But sand is our first component of all soil, and in many situations, sand is helpful in our gardens and our lawns and in most growing operations, in that it does allow for the penetration of water to work its way down, and plant root systems don't want to be smothered. It's a situation where even those root systems that are growing in a heavy clay situation, they cannot continually be waterlogged like what we're getting today, or create a situation where that water stands for any length of time, or we'll watch our landscape garden varieties as well as landscape variety plants start to succumb to either root rots or just dead roots from the base anyway. Sometimes it's very difficult to see what's going on or know what's going on without digging the plant up and actually looking at the root system. I'll grab that root between forefinger and thumb, and if I can have any type of root slough off in my hand, I've got a good idea that I've got a soil root rot that's occurring. Root rots happen everywhere. Verticillium, Fusarium, Phytophthora, those are our big three throughout Floyd County. They've stopped in years past, they've stopped our various tomato production from time to time. They've stopped beautiful maple trees that have lined a driveway here in Floyd. These are the situations that heavy clay soils tend to create for us, and helping those root rots really gain some attention. Now, this particular material here, as you notice and as you feel it, no longer does it feel the harshness of sand, or you press readily into it. It's nice and soft. This is the material where we really start to get concerned about, from a soil perspective, with regards to either erosion or those other situations where silt is washed out of our soil construction areas or construction zones. That's the purpose of silt fence in around those type of areas, to prevent that from reaching our water sources. When we have silt make our way into our creeks, whether it be from improper forestry practices and things that aren't being observed and done properly, anytime that type of material is moving into our creeks and our streams, particularly in Floyd County, because all of our water originates right here, right? We don't have anything that flows into the county. Every bit of our water originates here and flows out. We need to protect our streams and our water sources from that material there. If you have a lot of turbid water where the soil and the silt has washed into our streams, the fish gill systems, the microenvironment there in the streams themselves do not function and or can be adversely affected. That's a sideline right there. Josh is going to compare for the camera there. Lastly is clay. And this is always interesting, folks, because people say, well, clay is bright red. Clay is what I've got just off the hill here in Franklin County in Light. True, but as you feel this material here, you'll now understand why clay is truly the finest of material, and why when it is packed and when it is compacted and or when we have a large amount of this, it's easy to see that when it is reconstituted water, it becomes a barrier to water loss. It will actually hold water for extended periods of time. And in a garden situation, this is something that I want to try to avoid to some degree. I would like to have our soils have a nice, all three components in their regular mixed form, but repetitive plowing, tilling, and mechanization over those soil areas start to create the silt and clay separations for us, and our repeated actions of over those areas start to create what we call hard pan layer. So those of us that have had our gardens in the same spot, many of us have. In fact, when I get a soil test report back from the university, I can usually pick out which report is a garden area. It'll have wonderful nutrient levels all the way across the board and this, that, and the other. But it's those areas that people will say, well, all these nutrients, why aren't things growing? And in many cases, I can take them out there, we can dig down and show that below that repetitively tilled zone, we have created a hard pan that will no longer grow corn, wheat, the regular vegetables in the garden. We've created for ourselves an impenetrable layer there that needs to be broken up. It can be chisel plowed, it can be cut through. Things can be administered to help us get through that process and get the garden going again. But that I wanted to show as far as a real eye-opener. Sand, silt, and clay in any of their individual components really start to become a hindrance to what we're starting to grow. If I have just sand, and get back to sand for a moment, certainly allows our water through and allows that water to make its way. It adds airspace to the soil for our roots to grow in. But does it hold the nutrients and the microorganisms that we'd like it to hold in a garden situation? Not usually. It's usually very ready, it floods those materials on out and away. And we look to have, in many cases, a more regular or additional fertilizer program just to address those soils that are heavily sand. Just the opposite for clay. If the soil has got a lot of clay content to it, I can actually reduce many of my fertilizer amendments in the fact that many of them, once they meet or are bound in that clay layer, remain available to my plants for a long, long period of time, the exception being the nitrogen that we mentioned last class. So I just wanted to use that quick demonstration to kind of show you that there might be it's wonderful to see that tilled layer of ready-to-go garden out there. Keep in mind that every fourth, maybe fifth year, that repetitive use through that area might need a chisel plow or something driven through there to break up the hard pan. We may need to adjust or go in a different direction and try working our soil back in a different position altogether. It's certainly a recommendation for all of us to go back and consider old school cover crops or cover cropping, where through that late fall into winter, right now our wheat is about this tall in many of our fields. So is the rye, it could be spring oats. Any of those materials that can be added and planted over a garden space are tilling and moving down into the soil, really fracturing soil and helping us return that top green material as organic matter to our garden. So I strongly suggest cover crops in general. Now, with regards to soils and what's at your place and what's at your place and what's just down the road, how do you and I tell whether or not we have nice or usable soil? Hand, anybody? Is it the color? I like your answer. Your answer is the correct answer. She immediately came up and said testing. Yes, I have no better way of determining what is available in my soil to my garden or to my flowers or to my turf than actually performing a soil test. At any of the extension offices in your state, you are capable of picking up soil test boxes and soil test kits. And with these small boxes here, they form little 2x2 containers. We will actually fill that container up with some of our soil. It's best, if I'm thinking in a garden situation, I never want to collect my soil from one spot. I want to be random. I'd like to do it 2 or 3 areas across a garden maybe. If I'm in a field, it may be 7 to 10 areas across a field. If my turf looks different in my front yard from that of the backyard, or maybe there's an elevation or something there in the back, but my grass does not grow similar, I may sample the front yard separately from the backyard. But it's all to achieve, every bit of it is to achieve a baseline. It lets me know, number one, what my soil pH is. And when it comes to soil pH, every crop that we grow, whether it be turf, whether it be vegetables, whether it be flowers and stuff, everyone has their window of where their pH or where pH really releases or provides for the release of plant nutrients to the crop that's being grown. Now, the reason I have this second slide set up here is to really pull up a few key slides I've used in other talks or other conversations. But they're excellent for pointing out these windows for pH and raising pH up and down. Back to this very first slide, you don't have to have fancy tools to collect a soil sample, okay? Regular shovel and a bucket works just fine for me, particularly when it's hot and dry outside. I can't get a soil probe in the ground. So it's much easier for me to go out and about, take my shovel, I dig out a divot, and I turn it over, kind of out of my way, so that I can then look down the side of my soil or the side of my hole, and about 2 to 4 inches down, I'll take another slight sliver of ground, and I'll drop it into my bucket. And then I'll return my divot, and I'll make my way across the area that I'm sampling from. In that one bucket, in that one container, I'm going to stir everything up as one representative sample for that particular area. Not yard 1 and 2 together, but yard 1, all its samples together. Garden A, all of its samples together. And then that is what goes in my soil sample box to be sent off. This code that falls on the side of the box is a code that is specific to you. So JD for John Doe, G for garden, or F for field, whatever you want to make, as long as these 5 small box openings or letterings there correspond to what is on your soil test form over here, then you are, we're keeping your paperwork at that point with your soil. And when the results are returned to us, we're going to have a full idea of what is in that box or what comprised the makeup of that box. When we get a soil test report back, there's always a series of boxes and or tables that are located on in a soil test. This particular one, we can see right here, there was a crop code chosen, vegetable garden. In the event that we're commercial, the samples I showed you were commercial samples, we can get specifics. If we want to know just about tomatoes, I can choose crop code 71 instead of 210, and suddenly I will be dealing with a recommendation based on fresh market tomato production on bare ground in a commercial setting. So I have the ability to get as specific as necessary in which to benefit from these recommendations down below, or I can get as general as the basic homeowner's test, and it's going to give me the sample 210 for vegetable gardening. But some things don't change. Number one is if you've permitted us to respond via email from the Soils Lab, you are going to be sent directly to your home, your copy of your results, and guess who gets to receive them at the extension office? I do. And guess who will have those results and that information for further discussion, not this year, but maybe next year and year 3, okay? So in the event that you've made a decision on your garden year 1 or year 2, and you're trying to remember what we talked about or what we're thinking about for year 3, keep in mind that your soil's results are somewhere on our soil system for 3 years at a time. And then that enables us with a phone call to communicate back and forth and decide what we can adjust or maybe remind ourselves what plan of action we had started. Once that soil sample has been returned to you and you call my office, one of my first comments to you is, let's jump down here 3 boxes down, 1, 2, 3, 3 tables down. And right there is our soil pH for the soil that we placed in that box. In this particular case, it came back as a 5.7, relatively acidic for the soils, but not uncommon for many of the soils that I find in Floyd County, particularly those that have not been limed or had some wood ash amendment or something irregularly or have seen that recently. And the reason for that is most of our rain that falls in our southwest region is fairly acidic, a 4.6 pH, somewhere down well below 5 in most cases. And that rain repetitively year after year tends to, and our use of also acidifying fertilizers year after year, tend to kind of push our pH in soil down. Now, that being said, if I have limed recently and failed to capture some lime or the lime that I've added, there in our initial explanation of our soil test, they ask, has lime been added or recently or within the last year or within the last 6 months? So that helps the computer figure some of that information out. But in this particular case, it came back for a 5.7 pH. Is that good for garden soil in Floyd County? It's not the best, is it? It's really the bottom, it's the bottom window. It's the exact pH that if you were growing potatoes in your normal garden and they were starting to get potato scab, a disease that it really proliferates and does better in sweeter soil or normal garden soil up about a 6.5, and even sweeter it starts to get really prolific. You and I would be having a conversation on how to get our garden or move our potatoes to that side of the garden, because in the case of potato scab, that disease does not do well in more acidic soil. Yet my potatoes will tolerate, because this is in their window of soil usage. So that's one particular crop will grow down there. Now, if I was talking lawns and landscape, that's wonderful. All my azaleas, my rhododendrons, all my acid-loving plants of Floyd County would love that material around the edges of the house and things. If I'm talking small fruit, really the only one that's going to enjoy that and or lower is going to be blueberries. So with respect to the blueberry crop, which I would like to start out as low as a 4.8 to a 5, with that exception, there's very few things that I want below a 5.7. From a garden or a flower perspective, I want everything up from there. I've mentioned that I would like to see it in a 6.5. There's our wonderful mid window. If I can hit really a 5.8 up to a 6.8, I am just under neutral on the pH scale, and there is a bulk of fertilizer and nutrients available in my soil that is going to give my plants everything they need if those plants prefer that window in which to receive it in. Now, as I move on up, I look at the second box in my soil test, and my very first column is P for phosphorus. If I have to think about my plant nutrients on any bag of fertilizer, we have how many numbers? 3. Okay, the first one's for what? Yes, our nitrogen, our phosphorus, and our potash. Okay, or potassium. Nitrogen, green leafy growth. Green leaves, lots of them. Makes us mow the grass twice as much. Let's spell correctly for the television cameras, John. When it comes to phosphorus, that is our root growth. That is that material that will best suit us in a garden situation for those vegetables that really enjoy, from the potato perspective, anything in ground, carrots, the like, that are going to be a root vegetable or root crop, turnip and materials like that. And then potash, or K, I call that my plant antifreeze. That's probably not a good name for an extension agent to give potash, but the fact of the matter is potash provides plant vigor during adverse conditions. And just like you or I, if we're healthy and we happen to pass somebody on the supermarket aisle, we're not necessarily going to pick up on every little cough or sneeze or whatever that they create as they go by us. We're not going to pick up on them if we're feeling healthy and doing our part to stay healthy. We got good vigor. Same way with the plants. If I've got high potash, my plants, whether it be garden variety or even turf, it can be the actual pastured, the pastured forages and things that I have. As long as my potash remains high, I have those plants that typically have a higher vigor and are more resistant to drought conditions in the summer, and are usually more cold hardy throughout the winter. So by maintaining that third number in that rotation of MP and K, and maintaining it up to a desired level, that's the way I promote a healthy, vigorous plant. Now, in this particular case, as we moved on across, both the phosphorus for its root growth and its potash came back as high minus. In fact, the high minus number was about a 207 units or pounds per acre rate that has been found in your soil. I will say this, for any of us that gets a soil test back and your potash or your K in that second column, second box, if it's ever below 120 units, you have that piece of soil that when I ride down the road with Josh behind the camera or whomever, and we're doing a little survey looking at fields that just are going downhill, or that maybe I get that call. John, for 10 years my garden's been going gangbusters or whatever, but for this year I wasn't able to grow anything. And, come think about last year. I just couldn't get anything to grow or grow well. Usually, if I've pulled a soil sample, we'll find that potash has dropped below the magic number of 120. So I use that kind of as a rule of thumb, or in the back of my mind, that regardless of what I'm trying to grow, I want a potash level that is certainly above a medium minus, or 120 units per acre. Now, across this board, we start to look at all the other micronutrients. Those big three are your macros, and they do exactly like what we've talked about. The next two are two pretty important micronutrients for whatever garden varieties that we're growing. That's calcium and magnesium. So important are those micronutrients that we find calcium-based fertilizers and magnesium-based fertilizers just to boost those particular elements in garden and or flower or greenhouse production. In fact, a little secret, if you've ever bought wonderfully dark, beautifully green material and taken it home, planted it out in the garden, and about 2 weeks later it's kind of a pale green, it doesn't look like it's doing what it ought to be doing. Yes, one of the excellent ways I help kind of push plant material out is we will green things, usually with a magnesium fertilizer, right before sale, and they're just as green and black green as the shirts we're wearing, and we'll scoop them up and take them off, only to watch as that nutrient is used up, they return to normal garden color. These two nutrients, or micronutrients, are antagonistic of each other in many cases. So as long as I see both are high, both are medium, both are low, I don't have a problem. When I start to see one go very high and the other one is stuck down in medium or low, then I have a concern. There's a concern that would immediately pop into my mind, particularly in a garden situation, that now my magnesium levels, I've probably seen someone's using a fertilizer that has a mag nitrate or a high magnesium level, and that calcium is not being provided to that garden. When we think of things that calcium can help with or impact us with, how about blossom end rot? Okay, blossom end rot is one of our number one issues that we get repetitive phone calls with every year. When you have that tomato or the first set of tomatoes, peppers, Solanaceae in general, you have that first fruit develop and you've got that black nasty end on the bottom where the flower once was. That's blossom end rot. Now, that is typically not a disease. That's a physiological disorder. That's something you or I created for our plants by not having the necessary micronutrients and stuff somewhat balanced in the garden. So in many cases, blossom end rot is caused by a lack of calcium in the soil, or for those of us that go from go from wet conditions to dry conditions, back down to wet conditions, we create those situations where the plant has these huge swings from wet to dry. And at that point, calcium has a very hard time being absorbed. So to fix that particular situation, I may use a calcium nitrate or a calcium-based fertilizer prior to my planting ever going in. If I want to till in or incorporate in place of my 10-10-10, I'll incorporate a calcium nitrate along there, maybe 30 days earlier. So it starts to break down and start being utilized or distributed with microbial activity and everything else in the soil, beginning to disperse there. So when those first transplants get stuck out there in my soil, then suddenly they have a chance to start taking it up from the get-go. And then two, I'll start suggesting to whoever is having the calcium problem or the blossom end rot issues, I need you to be regular with water. It will fix your problem 9 out of 10 times. When I say regular, if the season starts off throwing us a curveball like what we've experienced so far this summer, and you're sitting there and you're getting nice rain for this period and things are nice and wet, and then we turn off dry and we wait and we wait. It's like, well, hopefully it's going to rain, and oh, it went by us again. You know, I'm trying to make a decision on whether I need to water. Keep in mind, if a season starts wet and we start into dry weather, we need to keep things relatively wet. We'll kind of keep things all the way through as moderate or be moderators with the water. If things start off dry, that's fine. Keep things relatively dry as we go through. It's the swings that occur and from hot to dry, or excuse me, not hot to dry, wet to dry, that create the calcium uptake issues in Solanaceae and create those problems for us, okay? So there's two things. We've already decided, my potato disease I've taken care of, my my tomato and pepper, blossom end rot I've taken care of by doing nothing more than looking at the results that I've gotten back on a piece of paper and thought to myself, what kind of adjustments can be made to fix that garden situation? Now, I think there's one more slide before I want to jump back, kind of go backwards with us for a second. Yeah, this one's kind of bumped up a little bit here on the bottom. This was the actual recommendations that the university or that computer at the soils lab has spit out for us and is now on that piece of paper for us to use however we choose to use, okay? That computer has understood that based on the crop code we chose, which was vegetable garden, that it would love to see that pH. The computer always does it to the maximum level. The computer likes to get everything up to perfect and then let us kind of work our way back from there. So it probably took us up to about a 6.8 in pH in its swing, because it is suggesting that we add lime at 9 pounds of agricultural limestone or pulverized per 100 square feet of row. And it is providing for, at that rate, the ability for our pH to go from that 5.7 up to that 6.5 to 6.8 range. Lime is very slow to break down in garden soil, and that's why we can't take huge swings at it, largely because we'll create a lime layer in the soil. And yes, that takes, in many cases, 3 to 4 months to really see the benefit of lime. That's why ideally, if this soil sample had been done in the fall of the year or early spring, we could have hit the lime, we could have done the things necessary. It doesn't have to be lime, I'm spitting out lime, but if we have wood ash, how many people have a wood burning stove at the house? 10-pound bucket of wood ash, 10 pounds is all you need, down a 100-foot row will raise that pH up a full point as well. That's why you've got to be cautious. When I talk about too much of what could be a good thing can absolutely turn out to be the wrong thing. I had a situation, commercial truck farming, about 11-acre piece of tract of land, best vegetable production around in the county that they were located in. In came the subdivision beside them, and the contractors made the decision, hey, let's go over there and ask them if they'd like all the wood ash. We're burning up all these trees. Sure, we'll take the wood ash. We can offset our lime costs. We'll spread wood ash instead of lime. And for the next 2 weeks, the contractor dumped over 60 tandem loads of ash over in the corner of the truck garden. And what resulted in that particular situation was, by the time they got the skid steer over, they thought they were doing the right thing by spreading it out. They were dropping it as they were going. They were, just reapplying as they were going. By the time they got done that season, and when they realized they couldn't even get their cover crop to grow, the wheat to grow, without turning as yellow as the lettering on your cap, they called the extension agent. And out I come with my soil box. I actually brought a soil meter, an actual pH meter as well. And we learned that their pH, once tested and back from the university, was sitting at 10.2. So anything that, it not only impacted them by taking the pH range up so high that most of the nutrients weren't available to the crop, it took the pH up so high that the microbes that had been growing in that centennial garden, in that centennial production scenario, couldn't survive. So we came in and literally had to dig trenches, and we placed compost, new compost and material in the trenches, and we grew vegetables again. And for the next 3 to 4 years, worked at getting pH back down to where we could have a relatively good truck farming situation off that piece of ground. So it's the same thing could happen to you or I. We're out there. Jon Vest said it's good to dump 100 or 10 pounds of wood ash on the garden. Too much of a good thing. If I'm out there all winter long and my garden sees wood ash from front to back to front and east to west to whatever, suddenly watch that pH not just go up a point, but go up 2 points or 3 points or whatever it may be. Too much of too much of the correct thing can be a negative. Let's pause right there when we talk about too much of a little thing. And I have 3 examples here in front of us of potting soil and various soil types that are available to us. Don't pay attention to the names. I'm not trying to sell or market anybody's particular product. I'm absolutely not picking on anybody's particular commercial product. I'm just pointing out the fact of what is available to us as far as homeowners when we go looking for soil in and around our area. Now, this extension agent is going to always preach, use what you have available to you and amend as necessary. That being said, say I want to go out here and I want to fill those plant containers up in the back of the room and I want to get everything growing as quickly as possible. too much of a good thing can result in bad results. I will say this. Soil is the one thing that we do more adjustment to after the fact than any other thing I think we mess with. When we bake a cake, we don't sit there and, oh, forgot the egg. When the cake comes out of the oven, let's slap an egg all over it or whatever. I don't try to fix the problem after the fact or after the damage. If you start with a particular soil, recognize what's in it, or I'm going to help you recognize what's in it. We're going to talk about those amendments that should be added or not added to it. And then any swings that we make in pH and adjustments and things of that nature, we're going to talk about small adjustments or fixing your soil in the beginning so that when my garden is ready to have the plants set out and the direct seeding or the transplants go out in it, that it is ready from the get-go. And then suddenly I'm not adjusting this row or adjusting this and creating irregularity in plant material. We call it the rump pig. If I'm out here growing 100 acres of corn and I look out across that field, I want to see 100 acres of corn come up within 24 hours of every single kernel that we planted. If not, and I get these low areas or where something's not working right, I get the rump pig started in the garden. And suddenly that rump pig that is behind everything else that's growing wonderfully and doing wonderfully and responding to my fertilizer and responding to this, suddenly it's the little sickly thing over here that's attracting insects and attracting disease and attracting whatever is then going to spread back over onto my desired crop. By getting our soil as uniform and treating it as uniformly as we can, ahead of the game, we will reduce those situations where we have rump pig plant production or garden vegetables growing in our soil. Okay. Right off the bat, when I mentioned seeding a couple weeks ago, I told everyone in here, don't run out and grab a potting soil that has a fertilizer charge in there. And when I say a fertilizer charge, it means, put this bag right here, feeds up to 6 months right off the bat. If I open the bag and I start to separate things out, here are my little yellow tan fertilizer pellets. Now, yes, it's a slow release fertilizer and should hopefully be not create any real problems for me as long as I've got good, strong transplants and things are going on. But if I was thinking about using this medium maybe initially for my seed starting, or particularly my small seed starting, in that situation, if I've got a charged potting soil, I have a salt in that soil. That little seed root, let's get rid of some of this for a second. When that little seed root starts to grow out from any seed, and from out of that seed starts to come that little seed root right there, it has about 2 hours to contact soil and start to grow into the soil or make its way into the soil. If I have set, in the case of fertilizer, a wonderful nice salt shaker, because that's what fertilizer is. Many of our parts of fertilizer is a salt. If I've created a salt situation in that soil and that first young root comes out there and contacts that ball of salt, what have I just done? Killed that plant. Not killed its root, I killed its only root that was going to get it started. Or I made it suffer to the point where now I've got a rump pig and it's not going to do well. So I have to pay attention to, yes, there's wonderful material or materials available to us that are all specific in the jobs they do. If I'm looking at initial seedling and starting young seeds and stuff in there, I oftentimes do not want to fertilize until I see my first set of true leaves. Not the little leaves that come out here, my seed leaves, not that seedling there. It's the next seedling up where suddenly my leaf looks like the leaf for that particular plant, My first set of true leaves. At that point, that's when a mild fertilizer solution is suggested to start carrying this plant on its way to maturity or to adulthood.